Test,
One, two,
test.
three.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Clock Talk with Greg Reddit. Greg, tonight, a treat because we have a live audience. Are you nervous?
Yeah, sure. I love the live audience. I want question and answer. It's my favorite part.
Well, for those that aren't familiar with Clock Talk, we usually time it. We usually do 15-minute segments, and tonight we're going for a full 60, and I'm going to start now. And tonight, we're obviously going to talk about metabolic health, cardiovascular health, and immunity for the body. So for those that are new, why don't you give us a quick, 2-minute overview of yourself and your business?
Well, I'm Greg Brannon, founder and medical director of Optimal Bio. I was an OBGYN for about 28 years before that. I have a passion for wellness and aging gracefully. And hormones are the foundation for how our body runs. And the problem is we're having such low values of hormones. What's happening is the environment is destroying our endocrine disrupting chemicals. So our the neuroendocrine system is being destroyed by outside sources. The body can adapt to a reason, but the problem is without being supplementated, it cannot keep up to the need it needs to become homeostatic. And Optimal Bio, that's what we do.
Fantastic. And 9 different locations throughout the Southeast?
Yeah, 9 now.
It's amazing the growth that you've had in the last few years. Obviously, there's a big need for this. Mm-hmm. You're not getting traditional care like you used to in the traditional medical community. And people just aren't simply feeling well today. And we've noticed that statistically, autoimmune has skyrocketed, cancers have skyrocketed, cardiovascular continues to be high as it always has been post-smoking. So what's going on?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Allopathic medicine, which is mainstream medicine, which I'm trained at. I was a pelvic surgeon, OBGYN. There's some great benefits to it, great benefits. You need a kidney transplant, you need a liver transplant, you're hit by a car. I did a lot of high-risk obstetrics, great medicine. What we're terrible at is preventive. What to eat, how to sleep, what kind of workouts, these things we have. And what happens, I believe, we have these outside agencies, we'll call government agencies, trying to get the perfect plan for all of us. And the problem is we're individuals. So there's not a perfect plan for all of us. And I'm not saying it's a motive to hurt us. I believe they're altruistic, they're trying to. But you can't have one thing for 330 million people. And I think we have these standards are sometimes the lowest common denominator. They're not what's optimal. And I think optimal is actually, when you start looking at it, is less expensive, easier to accomplish. It's simpler things. Max talks about in his Instagram. It's really as simple: walk, lift heavy things, go to sleep, and eat a good balanced diet. High in fat, high in protein. Avoid of the big things. Get away from ultra processed food. And then you have so-called experts say eat those things, and you got to look at the funding. There's all this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure people saw Tucker last week with Casey and Callie. The details out there are out there. So we have to ask these questions, because the most important person that understands your body is you. I think at Optimal Bio, we try to focus on the individual and we don't have all the answers, but we're looking for answers. We're asking questions because we know what we've done has not worked. Jason Fung's book, Obesity Code and Diabetes Code, he says, whatever we try, let's try something different. We've been doing this for 50 years. We're getting worse. This is the first time in American history, 4 years of decreased life expectancy. We have one of the highest infant death rates in the Western world. These things can't happen for what we spend on costs. So the question is why? And once you find the why, then you could have that. Then you could go to the root cause to help the body work, because the body is amazingly adaptive if given the right substrates. And I hope we wrote a book, Restore, about that. Our other book, Hormone Handbook, asks these questions. And obviously, we've been doing videos now for about 4 or 5 years. The key is information. Information's power.
And as we have a live audience tonight, at any point in time, if anybody wants to post a question, please feel free to do so. We'll make sure that Greg answers tonight. So obviously tonight, metabolic health, cardiovascular, and immunity. So kind of walk us through mitochondria for dummies, so to speak, and the metabolic health, and then we'll start with some questions.
Yeah, metabolic disease is a syndrome. Metabolic syndrome talks about having increased visceral fat, high blood pressure, lipids, and I'll go over lipids, why they're important, and the bad ones, the good ones, and how that works. But the major number one metabolic disease is diabetes. And we'll go into detail how testosterone works on that. Cardiovascular disease is tremendously protected with, actually, believe it or not, it's high cholesterol. Not this idea of how statins work. I'm going to go really detail on that a little bit later. And the immune system, it comes back to the substrates that allow all this to work. And there's a molecule called cholesterol. Cholesterol becomes multiple, it gets a little nerdy, but about mitochondria. There's this 2-carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA. That becomes this 6-carbon molecule, and that becomes, down the line, this 27-carbon molecule called cholesterol. Cholesterol becomes the basis of all of our sex hormones. It becomes 50% of all of our cell membranes. It becomes our mitochondria, which turns oxygen to energy. In fact, I read this paper this weekend that a red blood cell, the capillaries in our body are 5 microns in diameter. A red blood cell is 7. Well, how does a red blood cell get through that? If the cell membrane is 23% cholesterol, it's flexible. Under 21% increases strokes. I mean, it's just over and over and over again. So what we want to do is, what's the culprit of all this? Is inflammation, oxidative response. It means when these molecules get an extra electron, they become very sticky. So inflammation is the key on this. But the structure for each of these things. So you talked about diabetes. Cholesterol becomes this molecule called adoxalic acid. It becomes part of the insulin receptors. So when cholesterol is messed up, diabetes increases 32% on statins. It becomes a part of our immune system. In fact, statins have been shown, this is very interesting. This is where statins are beneficial for atherosclerosis. It's one of the most potent anti-inflammatories by inhibiting this molecule called NF-kappa beta, which helps decrease inflammation. But the problem is, that's the crux of our immune system. So you may decrease inflammation, but increase overall cause of death and cancer. And the other one we talked about is diabetes. Is cardiovascular disease. Inflammation. What happens is when the endothelium gets dysfunctioned and gets I'll call it nicked, the body, that little cell there, calls the liver and says, "Liver, send me cholesterol." It's the Band-Aid. Dr. Miller, a famous cardiovascular surgeon, says blaming cholesterol for atherosclerosis is like blaming a fireman at the house to put the fire out. So these things have built up over time because I think we just want to find the silver bullet for everything. I think that's the idea. But the silver bullet, by the way, is your body. It has it.
So first question, why is diabetes so prevalent today? What is going on? I know diet, obviously, and chemicals and food and all that stuff, but I mean, from a metabolic standpoint, what's been happening?
Yeah, they talk about at least 10 to 20% of Americans are. Obesity is now up to around 65% of Americans. It's insulin resistance is the bottom line. So what happened was, we used to be protein and fat eaters. The food pyramid came in 1977 and be pushed to a grain eater. And grains are much more higher in sugar than people realize. And what happens is, your bodies, there's 2 types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, where you don't make insulin. There's type 2, where you make too much, but the receptor is insensitive. That's the issue. So I believe it is our diet that led to this. Again, this ultra-processed food is very, very high in sugar. So our natural system is overwhelmed. And very interesting, when you have this is done on diabetic males who have diabetes with blood sugar, with testosterone level under 300, they have a 2-fold increase in death, 250%. When they go on testosterone therapy, this is a study, 11-year study done in Germany, they actually have diabetes remission 34%. Hemoglobin A1C drops by 17.6% within 6 months. And stopping TRT, it comes back within 6 months. So the bottom line is the body overrun by sugar, simple sugar. We need some certain cells in our body. We said a few months ago, we talked about the Randall cycle. We need sugar for certain cell types, but we also, fat is a very great energy source. So the key is get out of insulin resistance. That's the pre-diabetic state. That leads to metabolic disease. That leads in women to polycystic ovarian disease. That's a hyper sugar disease. These are all things that have to do with our diet. You look back about 50 years ago, these diseases were much less.
So if these people that you cited in the study, if they were on testosterone and they had a 34% reduction, did they change their diet at the same time as well?
There was two studies, the two arms. One with study changing diet without medication, without testosterone, one that it was not even close. The testosterone arm was completely superior.
Okay.
Because again, this is why. Biochemically, testosterone makes the insulin receptor more sensitive to accomplish its goal. In fact, when we have some of our patients who are type 2 diabetic on insulin, you can see their insulin load, the amount they need for daily consumption has decreased. Does not mean you don't do the diet. Exercise is crucial after you eat. Strength training, lifting weights, eating the proper food. I just can't stress. The problem is we're so insulin resistant already. We got to get out of that state first. That's why I'm a big believer in fasting, a carnivore diet, ketosis, anything to eliminate that mass amount of sugar. Once you become insulin resistance is gone, then there's a place for sugar. Then your body wants to be adapted. It wants to have both the opportunity, because your body's built to use the fuel it needs, either sugar or fat. It does not want to use protein. That's the last thing. It can use it, but it's the last thing it wants to use because protein builds our body.
On that note, can BHRT influence metabolism? I think you've already answered that question, but
It's interesting. There's about 10 functions testosterone does that actually helps the body metabolically. One of them, it makes this liver makes this protein called IGF-1, which insulin growth factor 1, that augments our insulin, again making it more sensitive, so decreasing diabetes. In the fat, it actually augments the fat cell called adiapectin, a hormone in fat cells that actually gets rid of visceral fat. It actually inhibits these molecules that actually cause things to adhere. They're called VCAMs. They actually adhere and cause blood clot, to cause adherence of clots. That's actually inhibited. There's two major, that's the immune part of it. There are the thing called cytokines. These are molecules that make the body run under stress. They're cytokines because acute inflammation is life-saving. Chronic inflammation is life-debilitating. And you have these two major ones, one called interleukin-1, one called TNF. Those are inhibited by testosterone, and interleukin-10 is anti-inflammatory. It's enhanced. So everything, the number one anti-inflammatory your body makes, by the way, is testosterone. So if all metabolic syndromes, diseases have to be at the inflammation level, this is the best thing to inhibit those things.
how can hormones, talk about blood pressure for a second, how can hormones impact blood pressure?
Okay, we say hormones. Okay, first off, there's a bunch of hormones.
Let's say testosterone.
Okay,
In this
testosterone.
case.
Because we have a hormone called aldosterone that comes from cholesterol as well, that has to do with our kidneys and our blood pressure and keeping our vascular contract and not contract for blood pressure. But in simple terms, testosterone becomes estradiol. Estradiol is a vasodilator. Also, testosterone increases an enzyme called nitrous oxide synthase. Nitrous oxide causes vasodilatation. So a proper bioidentical hormone, not anabolic, not non-human, we're talking bioidentical hormone therapy, actually causes a low or optimization of blood pressure.
Okay.
But you said something about mitochondria, and I blew through that. Every cell of our body has this little powerhouse. This powerhouse is called mitochondria. We can make energy when we take oxygen in, and we can make energy when there's no oxygen. That's called fermentation. The fermentation route uses a thing called glycolysis that gives you this thing called ATP. This is like the dollar bill of our body. Everything needs ATP to form an energy bond that when that breaks, releases energy to run things. And a sugar molecule, glucose, gives you 2. It costs 2 to start the process. It makes 4, so a net 2. A molecule of fat gives you 38. Or taking it through the mitochondria, called the Krebs cycle, you get 38. So that's when you have oxygen in place. That's why it's very important to have a nice, when you're working out, anaerobic versus aerobic training. But this is important. That's happening inside the inner matrix of the mitochondria. To make it really simple, cyanide kills mitochondria and we die within seconds. So mitochondria turns oxygen into energy. I can't stress that enough. And it can use fat or sugar based upon this thing called the Randall cycle, was optimized. If you get too much fat, around over 30%, after you're done being insulin resistant, you could actually push the thing more to the fermentation, and you don't want that.
And where does carbon play?
Carbon
dioxide is very important too.
Carbon dioxide is crucial, but carbon atom itself, it's a molecule that is basically the skeleton for everything else to attach to it, right? Where carbon forms. And the oxygen molecule, the red blood cell will carry oxygen to tissue, carbon dioxide away, okay? But it's much more efficient in carrying carbon dioxide. But having some carbon dioxide actually makes the body keep itself in balance. You need both to make it in balance. But carbon dioxide, as well as free radicals to a point, keeps the system in check at the mitochondrial level. But it's the play between oxygen and carbon dioxide.
Sure.
But if we think about the cycle, we breathe in oxygen that plants make. We exhale carbon dioxide, which they use to reverse photosynthesis to do their energy source by bringing CO2 and oxygen. It's a great cycle of life.
Yeah. Carbon's good.
There are studies to show carbon's about 0.04% of the atmosphere. And if it's get lower to 0.02%, life does not exist. And by the way, you're carbon. I'm carbon.
Yeah.
Okay.
So start calling the carbon boys.
Exactly.
How can I improve metabolic health if I'm on BHRT and I exercise? What else can I do?
The thing about this, I want to make sure people understand, it's not the first step. We're not here to say everybody needs BHRT. I think most of us do. I'll go over a reason in detail later on. But there are smart things to do. Sleep is crucial. The body has 5 cycles. You get your REM sleep, your non-REM cycles. These are crucial for the body to heal itself. That's when your cortisol is redone, your testosterone is made. That's your body resets itself. So sleep is number one. And then fasting has shown increased testosterone in males up to 1,300%. So these are things you could do. Lift weights, strength training. These are great. But here's the thing that got me going on this. We're both diabetic, we'll say, and you're a type 1 and I'm a type 2. The first thing we're going to do is eat and exercise better. No. For me, that's the first step. For the type 1, I give you insulin because all this stuff is irrelevant without the actual hormone to do the stuff. So that's important. And I believe we're all in the sex hormone aspect, because this is people understand. It's crazy. The most abundant active hormone in the human body is testosterone. It's 50 times higher than a woman's estrogen. So it's like telling, again, type 1 diabetic, at your age, you don't need insulin anymore. At your age, don't worry about it. It's insane. The body can't function that way. So this is why you look back at the older data. In our bodies, testosterone becomes estradiol. Estradiol goes back to the brain and turns off the testosterone. And there's a bell curve. If you fall in that bell curve, doctors mistakenly call that healthy because 80% of people fall in that curve. Today, the LabCorp's range is 264 to 916 for a man, 4 to 41 for a woman. Great. 7 years ago, it was 77 to 70 for a woman, and for a man, it was 348 to 1197. So the first question you ask yourself, why are we changing the scale? I'm old. I'm 64. Back when I was in school, the range was roughly 900 to 1400. That was from a study done in 1940, and women are roughly 70 to 250. So the question to ask is, why are we 3 to 4 times lower than we were then? Sperm in male and in North America, sperm is down 2% per year since 2002, 1% since 1970, and it correlates with sperm count plummeting. They're 50% our generation. So these questions should be asked. I believe it has to do with endocrine disruptors,
right.
But we have to ask these questions because any machine cannot run efficiently at 20% the fuel, period.
That's a good point too. I mean, they're not increasing for type 1 diabetes, the insulin score, correct?
100%. And that's the thing is, oh, you're 60 now, you don't need insulin anymore. But the problem that if you stop insulin, you die in a few months. If you don't have testosterone optimized, you die over time. I think it's chronic disease. Dr. Mark Richards, he was a consultant for the Obama White House. He's a Yale-trained doctor. He wrote a great book called Nobody Wants You Healthy. And he talked about pre-COVID numbers. America spent roughly $2 trillion a year on healthcare. 90% is chronic disease. And I was listening to Robert Kennedy the other day. He says and when his uncle was president, there was $0 spent on chronic healthcare. There was no chronic healthcare. It was acute care, and that was it. And it's not like we suddenly became great, diagnosticians and find all these diseases. Something's going on. So he estimated that when you optimize testosterone levels, you can cut that chronic care cost by 50%. Just think about how much that money that is just getting rid of diabetes alone. So I think it is a cost on society if we could be healthier. That is astronomical beneficial to society.
Couple of questions that came in. We're kind of going to just jump around.
Yeah, I love it.
This is good for a little marketing push for you. What root cause testing do you do at Optimal Bio?
Root cause testing. I love that phrase. When I was trained, you always do test things if you're going to make a decision based upon them. And there's a bazillion tests you can do. And I'm also board certified in functional medicine. I love genetic. There's a bunch of tests to do, but the core test: check your blood count, check your liver enzymes, check your hormones, check your thyroid. We check 9 parameters of thyroid, not just 3, not just 2, because the one that's used the most is TSH. That's the one in the brain. And if that's under 4.5, we call ourselves healthy. But it's the ones under that are very important, because I talk about the mitochondria. The thyroid in the neck they make 5 hormones: T0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The big ones are T4 and T3. T4 is not any function. It converts more to T3. So when the body secretes it, about 80% is T4, which is used in later time, and 20% is secreted immediately, which the cells use immediately. And then peripherally, the liver converts it over. And so the data, Dr. Abrams, Dr. David Brownstein's books talks about the most important numbers are the ratio between reverse T3 and T3. They're called enantiomers. There's one's on, one's off is what they do. No doctor ever checks those things, because when you look, Dr. Abrams in the 70s said, if you look at not just labs, but symptoms, thinning the hair, eyebrows, bloatiness, cold intolerance, it's how 40% of Americans have it. Now, in 1979, they took a crucial element out of our diet, iodine. We used to eat 200 times more iodine than we do today. Iodine is crucial for breast, prostate, thyroid, brain. When that happened, you saw thyroid disease increase 8-fold in women, 3-fold in men in America. And plus that, breast cancer, cystic breast increased, ovarian cysts, because this thing called the iodine makes there's a thing called the iodine sodium system that keeps this cell structure proper, and that's inhibited when they have enough iodine. So these are compounds on itself over and over and over. I think they replaced it with bromine because it may have been cheaper. And I'm not saying it's mean, but our body needs everything. And that's the problem, Jim. When you have a top-down monolith make a decision for 300 million people fall through cracks. Mm-hmm. At Optimal Bio, I believe we do it individualized. You may need different than I need. And I think that's why when you give the fuel to the body, how do we know we're successful? Because your joint pain goes away, your belly fat goes away, you're sleeping, you're waking up, your energy. These are subjective things that are very difficult to measure. So we have ranges to look at, but what guides us is your response.
Sure. So CBC panel,
liver hormones,
comprehensive hormone panel, mm-hmm. comprehensive thyroid panel, mm-hmm. For a male prostate.
I do PSA. And then and I also check, in men, I check for the brain. There's 3 levels that you could have low hormones from. It's called primary, secondary, and tertiary. So we check hormone levels at each of those levels, see which one you are. Because if you could be a Pop Warner football and have a head concussion, it could be a central organization. Most time it's the gonad itself, but we check that to make sure where it is. We've picked up brain tumors, usually they're benign, usually what's called a prolactinoma, by finding that their levels across the border low. We find a level being high, we get an MRI, and we find that. So it's actually treated with medication. And
to make perfectly, just for the audience's sake, you refer out, you don't treat people for anything else.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about diet. Another question. Any truth to the strict carnivore crowd who says you should only eat beef, bacon, butter, eggs, no plants, of any kind and that plants are universally bad. Any truth to that?
That's Dr. Sean Baker's stuff, Carnivore Diet, which I love his book. I love his science. He's brilliant. We had him on our podcast. So I think there's a lot of benefit to that. He talks about, he actually has some great science showing how the only defense these plants have are to make chemicals to wipe us out. So we talked about that.
Yeah, because plants don't want to be eaten,
It's
right?
that same thing, right? And we talked on the show. I like ice cream. I like a little fruit now and then, but on pure health reasons, I do like that a lot. Now, interesting, Mercola about 6 weeks ago came out. He was that way for years, and now he added the idea. It has to do with studies out of Hungary, talking about the mitochondria back again. Is once you're not insulin resistant, that optimization is should not be over 30% fat. I found the keto-ish fasting carnivore diet changed my life. I was diabetic 20 years ago, and I was doing triathlons at the time, working out, but I ate 6 meals a day, oatmeal every morning, the way you're supposed to do it. And I read Mark Sisson's book called Primal Blueprint that changed my life. So I lean towards that diet, yes. But I still like ice cream.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of benefits to it.
But the science is, I can't stress, Dr. Baker is brilliant, and the research he does is insane. Red meat's bad, garbage. It's the opposite. Eggs are bad, garbage. Margarine is one molecule away from candle wax.
Right.
You know, we for 6, 7, 8,000 years of known history, we were hunter-gatherers. You're happy you got that beef, you ate it, you were satisfied, and I'm on that path. Yes, 100%.
Well, I think also, I mean, I have a couple friends. One person I know, she's a 55-year-old woman, and she has an autoimmune, and she went on strict carnivore. I mean, almost strict as Dr. Baker, and she's great now.
It is.
You know, other people have tried it, and it doesn't really work, so they got to modify, some of it. So again, it's all how you feel at the
Dr.
end of
Baker
the day,
talks
right?
about that.
Right.
Modification for thing. I just think and again, I love Jason Fung's book on this. His answer is this: the fast, which is great. I mean, he said a study with diabetics, 3 weeks of just water, and the diabetes goes away, because we're so. I can't stress how bad the food pyramid is. I just 9 to 12 grains every day. And on top of that, our grain here is different than the grain in Europe. We're over GMO'd. Right. That modifies the gluten. Glyphosate is illegal in Europe. There's benefits. My wife has Hashimoto's, a very bad gluten disease. When we're over there, not one bellyache and lost 5 pounds because just eat. The thing is, ancient grains are real. Free range meat. I love what Sean talks about. He goes, yeah, we eat grass. Yeah, we do that. Have the cow eat grass first. Mm-hmm. They have 4 stomachs. They prepare it, then we eat the cow.
So in theory, you're getting vegetables, right?
You're getting all the benefits from that. So so the answer is I'm that person. I sort of modify. Mine makes it easier for me that I just can't chew a ribeye every day. I love it. I eat probably 5 days a week. My way to is I skip breakfast. But I'm going to be clear. Women are much more difficult than men, a cycling woman. And Dr. Pelz's book, Fast Like a Girl, and I forgot the lady's name, it was in Dr. Huberman's a couple weeks ago out of Stanford, and she talks about straight training, and women, before they work out, they should load up with carbohydrates before they work out. Mid-cycle, they should add carbohydrates. So there's benefits. It's just cycles change. We're simpler because we're men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a thing the other day on Cheerios, mm-hmm. and it's supposed to be a health food for you, right?
Poison.
And after the GMO'd oats, you have 2 sugars. Then you have a preservative in there that keeps the Cheerio looking nice and fluffy, but it's used in detergents and cleaners. Yep. And the FDA allows you to have 70 milligrams a day of this, and they say it won't harm you. So
yeah. How about just eat meat and eggs, and if you want, and if you do organic veg, that's the thing too. The process again with the idea of making more food for everybody, which is a great idea, feed the world. But there's again, I heard Dr. Robert Kennedy talk the other day, and we've been talking about this for years. Our topsoil's been destroyed. When the soil is used properly, that's where our nutrients, that's where our probiotics come from, our prebiotics come from, our iodine, our selenium. All these things come together if done properly. When you overprocess it. And GMO, again, I know people say it's okay. You're eating genetically modified organisms. Our body's not built over 7,000 years of that.
Right. Can low testosterone contribute to neurological issues such as occipital neuralgia?
Okay, that's a specific disease you're looking at for the eye and the pain there. I don't know per se, I can't say exactly, but I do know this. Testosterone is the number one anti-inflammatory the body makes. So if you're suboptimized, you have more chance for an inflammation, period.
Yeah, I might have mispronounced that name, but it's actually it's not having to do with the eyes. It's more of this stiff neck, shoulders. You're inflamed up in the upper.
Okay. But the thing about this is the actual synapse between the neurons that grow are made out of cholesterol. And they make this thing called dolichic acid, which becomes neuropeptides. Without cholesterol, you don't have neurons, you don't have synapses. At that level, it's actually testosterone, estrogen. We were taught that steroids only work in the receptors only inside of the nucleus. Now we know it's on the outside of what's called genomic and non-genomic function. And we know that in the brain, in the synapse, it works very quickly. You can look at papers on PTSD and TBI. It's very, very beneficial. In our book, we have a whole section on Restore on that. It has to do with how the brain works. So the actual synapse makes more, called synapticity, that the actual gets tighter and more junctions so that can actually talk better. So anything that makes that better happen, so that's high fat. Cholesterol is crucially important for that. Remember, the brain can, the cholesterol is a big molecule, and the liver can't make it to go there. The brain makes it itself. The problem is statins go through the blood-brain barrier. That's why you look at Alzheimer's patients, they have very low cholesterol on cholesterol and dementia stuff. So now back to the stiffness of the neck. Anything in this muscle is beneficial with testosterone.
Okay. How do you feel about eating protein first thing in the morning? Better for women than men, or vice versa?
Yeah, again, there's been studies that show as we age, it's good to work out an empty stomach. Dr. Pelz's book and the doctor from Stanford, women have to have it appears to have carbohydrates, the most important part for the workout. But then within an hour, women must eat. Okay, high fat, high protein and fat immediately. Men have about a 3-hour window, women about an hour window. So when you talk about, is it no workout or workout? I like skipping breakfast. I think we eat too much food in that. Dr. Mark Sisson, I talked about before, he wrote another book a few years ago called 2 Meals a Day. So condensing our eating window, I think, is key. 3 meals a day with snacks is the fad. That's not normal. So if you're more of a breakfast person, I love breakfast on weekends, but I won't eat a higher lunch. So I try to eat within an 8-hour window during the day.
How much protein do you recommend for men and women to consume daily?
I was blown away at that. I thought it was a gram per kilogram. And hey, listen, Huberman, in that study, they actually recommended a gram per pound. So so whatever you weigh, measure.
So 170 grams then if you weigh 170 pounds?
And this is what Sean was great on. All these myths, Dr. Baker, all these myths that you can't absorb more than 20 grams a day at a meal. There's no studies on this stuff. It's just made up. And so I try to eat as much as I can. I try to eat as much as you can. So that's the key. We're made out of protein. That's important. Now again, talking liver function good, kidney function good, and there are certain disease processes like PKU where you can't have a certain amino acid that are medical diseases that you know about.
How do you feel about the protein powders that are out there, the good ones?
I think it's a great accessory to your meal. Again, I think whole food is the best. But I try to do 4 or 5 times a week. I add a meal. I think it's a way of getting high quality. I try to get one isolates whey. The key is, I was reading this paper. One of our patients actually is a doctor of a research pharmacist. He talked about even if you're getting natural whey from a grass-fed cow, it's the plastic they put in the udders. So it's just almost everywhere, right?
Right.
So that's why I filter water. But I try to get the most organic grass-fed thing you can. And you'll know if it's good. If you're bloated, out the door. Get rid of it.
Interesting. What is the unsung hero of food, and what is the item we are all overlooking in the grocery store?
Okay, the best food in the whole world.
Could be Lucky Charms, right? The
Yeah,
FDA said they were number
bullet.
one, right?
You see back that study? Yeah, they had beef at the end. I think a free-range egg is probably the greatest food, and free-range red beef. I would show Dr. Baker that 100%. Just think what an egg is. It's everything that life needs. Everything in one place. So I love that. I just find that, again, when you look how our bodies run, fat and protein is crucial.
And whatever you do, don't go down the middle of the aisles, correct?
Yeah. I mean, Jim, all the stuff we're hearing about, because, with Robert Kennedy out there, that stuff, and Callie and Casey's show on Tucker, the ultra-processed food. There's a book called The 100-Year Lie about the FDA. 90% of our diseases were not here 100 years ago. Also, 90% of our food wasn't. There's got to be a correlation.
Right.
And again, I've said, there's not the guy in a room trying to kill us. But we sometimes put profit. I'm a capitalist. I'm not knocking that either. But there's repercussions to actions. And we have to ask these questions. Autism was 1 in 100, 1 in 10,000 in 1960. That's 1 in 22. We got that.
It's actually 1 in 36. I looked it up.
Well, 122 in Illinois, in 3 states, Illinois,
Right. Yeah.
California. So overall, they expect by 2050, it's an MIT study, by 2050, be 1 in 2. And this is the point we have to ask these questions. Why? And therefore, we have to look at vaccine schedules, how much aluminum is good. All these things have to be asked. We just cannot put our head in the ground. So therefore, I think going backwards in the sense of what we used to do, not stop technology, but how we used to eat and not have diseases, let's get back to the way we used to eat. I think that's simple.
So mold seems to be a hot topic these days.
What is
mold?
Oh, yeah.
All right. More and more people are talking about mold affecting the body. What are your thoughts on this, and how can you detox?
I'm not an expert on that. I took some classes on that, and it's a real deal. And that's why when a person was complaining about vague symptoms, you got to ask these questions. There's some great functional medicine doctors around here that I know that do mold testing, fungi testing. They do it. And I think if you have symptoms, you're down that path, you should be tested. There's not without a question. And then it depends what it is. I don't have treatment plans. I'm not a pro at that. But that's a real deal. It's not in your head. Here's the big thing. 80% of us are on antidepressants because it's in our head. Now understand something. Your brain is in your head. That's why you're feeling these things. That's why it's so important not to be dismissive of your symptoms, whatever they are. And the more you talk, the more you take control, ask questions, and look for the answers, I think the better you're going to be.
Obviously, it seems the mold potentially can cause inflammation, correct?
100%.
And so if you're on BHRT, that may help reduce some of the
There's
inflammation.
no doubt.
I'm not saying that's the cure.
No, there's no doubt about it. When your body's optimized, vitamin D. Vitamin D helps decrease flu season, helps decrease viral, helps decrease cytokine reaction. So when everything's optimized, there's these 2 famous doctors from the 1880s, 1890s, Louis Pasteur and Deepak. And Deepak would say, it's not these bugs or germs, the germ theory. It's not. It's you train. How strong is your system? Now, Pasteur won the day. I still have a debate in the germ theory, but if a stronger immune system has a better chance of defense against these things out here. So I believe you could, we did a podcast on COVID in November of 19. I said, I don't know what that is, but get your D high, quercetin high, C high, do the things that you know are healthy, and that makes your immune system strong. Now, at the core of your immune system is cholesterol, okay? And that becomes our hormone. So these are the building blocks. We were not, I have a belief God's in charge of this. He knew what he's doing, made the system. He knew what he made it. We have an immune system.
Let's transition over to that, because you said you wanted to talk about statins in a little bit more detail. Talked a little bit about statins. Obviously, they're prescribed to reduce cholesterol, and there's this theory out there from some cardiovascular doctors that there's different types of LDL, the fluffy kind, the less fluffy kind. Nonetheless, cholesterol comes in, knocks down the LDL, which gives the HDL more freedom to do its thing, which scrubs the arteries, so to speak. And at the end of the day, your plaque potentially could be reduced. And you say
no. Okay. Here, and again, I'm no genius on this, but I'm reading a ton on this. Okay.
Answer didn't surprise you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, again, your liver makes 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day. So you're making a structure to kill you. Now, this is Dr. DeBakey, Dr. Miller. These are world famous cardiovascular surgeons. 58% of heart attacks have no plaque. Okay. Dr. Ansel Keys had this hypothesis because he's found plaque, which they knew for years in the 1800s. There's cholesterol, this yellow stuff in these things. It's only in the arteries, not in the veins, which is weird. So they thought that was the cause. No, it's a response. It's a response to sugar being oxidized. So when you have an oxidized cholesterol, which is not healthy, Yes, that causes inflammation. I agree 100%. Then you look at what cholesterol does. Again, your brain is 85% cholesterol. 85% cholesterol. Red blood cells we talked about. Red blood cells. If you're under 21% in the cell membrane, it's not flexible enough. I can do over and over again. So there's a great Dr. Lou Rockwell has a great website. There's a doctor on there called the Midwestern Doctor. About 3 weeks ago, he read a phenomenal review article on cholesterol, like just phenomenal review article. But statins work, again, for the inflammation. So here's what a statin does. It blocks this thing called HMOG-CoA reductase, which is the step that forms a thing called malonic acid. Now, malonic acid becomes destructive, so it blocks that. I'll go over next. It also, I talked about the NF kappa beta, which again, that's why it works on atherosclerosis in the sense of a decreased inflammation. But it also turns off your immune system. That's why there's a higher cancer rate. Dr. Diamond talks about that wonderful in his videos. The other thing it does is, I can't stress what it does on the thing called DICHOLI. That molecule becomes this thing called a neuropeptide in the brain. How the brain actually talks. It also becomes part of the insulin receptors. So when you stop that, this cascade of events occur. Now, if you look at the hard data, if you had a heart attack and take a statin, you increase your life 1 to 4 days. And there's a great paper by Muldoon that shows 100% of people taking statins have cognitive decline. 100%.
100%?
100%. Okay? So that's what's frustrating is there may be benefit for the anti-inflammatory. So are there other ways to do anti-inflammatory? And that's the question you have to ask ourselves. So that's why we have these questions. You just can't. We have to ask questions. That's all I'm trying to say. But it makes, when you look at the data, don't trust me. I'm just reading guys and stuff. But you look at the data out there, supports it. When you see how much happens with all these cell parts decreasing, CHF increases, congestive heart failure increases because the mitochondria gets weaker. Remember, we talked about that. That's the fifth thing it does. It makes ubiquinol, which is CoQ10. When you block that, you affect mitochondria. Your heart is 35% by weight mitochondria. So the answer is, I think, do your homework.
So in your opinion, from a supplemental standpoint, is CoQ10 probably the best thing you can take?
100%. So if the original study on statins, the original study was patented with CoQ10 in it. And it was too expensive.
And our CoQ10 is not that expensive.
But the thing about this, Jim, is this. There's not one medicine that's cured a disease. And I'm not anti-medicine. I'm not. But they got to be specifically used. And there's risk and benefits for everything. Now, the only thing I'm finding that isn't risky is when you put a bioidentical structure in your body and optimized levels, everything is better. I can't stress Dr. Richard's book. It's data upon data upon data. We have 397 references. I have 94 on breast cancer alone in there. The data is not, there's been 26,000 articles written since 1935 on pellets. 26,000.
Speaking of the book, how can one get it if they're watching right now?
Amazon. Go to Amazon and order there. And we have an Audible. We have all that. And we're very honored. That's been an Amazon Gold Medallion seller, which is great. It's just, I want information. Because again, if you talked to me 18 years ago on this, I'd laugh. Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, if it's not FDA approved, if it's not this, not that, forget it. And in my years of doing things, it makes sense. I started asking more questions.
So another question came in. Again, we're going to jump around. Is there any food or nutrient to boost immunity against the stomach bug? I'm so afraid of my kid bringing it home from daycare this winter. Of course, I know your answer is going to be
vitamin D.
D3,
yeah,
right?
D3 with K2 in it. I can't just interesting. A couple supplements. I read a paper about 6 months ago, and I wish I knew this was an OB. There's a study showing if you take 12.5 milligrams of iodine when you're pregnant, baby average IQ is 30 points higher. You think about it. Fluoride, now papers coming out, fluoride is lower in IQ. We knew that 30, 40 years ago. So, because they're called halogens. And if you look at the periodic table, it goes fluoride, chlorine, bromine, iodine, statin, which is funny. All those are bad for your body, but one, iodine. Iodine is life-saving. So when you mess up with the way the body works, we have repercussions to these things. But vitamin D, we know there's about 20,000 genes in our body. We know right now vitamin D works on at least 2,000 of them. And the biggest thing is our immune system. There's a thing called, we talk about cytokines. So what vitamin D does, there's these cells in our immune system called dendritic cells. It's like you have a nuclear bomb going off to kill the bad stuff, but you want to protect the rest of your body. So the body has this thing called, picture a big web over that. That's called the dendritic cells. So when the bad things are getting beaten up by our immune system, that protects the cells. That when you heard it during COVID that people die in a cytokine storm, that's you didn't have enough vitamin D, because vitamin D protects from cytokine storm. So vitamin D, vitamin C, those are crucial.
The average male or female in the U.S. is probably running, what, 40 to 50 vitamin D?
Probably more closer to 30.
30?
Now, that's what's very interesting. The government recommends keep it above 30. That's the standard. That gets rid of rickets, osteomalacia, right? A disease from the 1910s. Great paper at Hopkins showing different disease processes are inhibited the higher you go. Around 85 seems to be optimized. There's a study out of Japan about 12, 15 years ago. Our government, the NIH, says the flu vaccine, this is how they do it. They have to guess which virus will be next year. They put two B's and one A in that vial every single year. They say they're good 3% of the time. 3%. Okay, that's what they say. The Japan study said they decreased the flu vaccine by having your vitamin D above 65, 800%. Okay, take vitamin D because your body could do the immune system. So vitamin D is I can't stress enough. And in the wintertime, it has to do very interesting. The more north we are, the higher latitude of 35, the less D we get based upon the angle of the sun. So it's important, especially in the summer, liquid sunshine. So take your vitamin D, D3 with K2. And the reason why with K2, vitamin D3 can increase high calcium. So kidney stones, it can mess up our electrical current of our heart. But K2 protects what's called the parathyroid, which is the calcium. So you take those properly, it's absorbed properly and it protects you from calcium. And it's the best. That and vitamin C. We don't make vitamin C as human beings. So it's very, very important that we have those two in our body.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you recommend for most patients at Optimal Bio 10,000 a day.
Again, because you see that you're going to hover around about 85 to 100 at that point. Now, some people metabolize differently. If you find it that you're 140, then go back off. But again, I can't stress the benefit of K2 with that. That's important.
Yeah, and the goal obviously is to make sure it's up in that 80 range.
And you eat it with fat because it's the fat soluble. That's what vitamin K is, the fat, and vitamin K helps absorb it.
So you eat your steak, have your vitamin D. And
halfway
K
through my meal, that's what I do.
All right. Any precautions other than vitamin D to take during flu season?
Well, obviously, wash your hands. Okay, that's common sense. I could get very controversial, but okay.
Well, I think also, you got to build your immune system. It's like a muscle, right? So you should be outdoors. You should be exposed to people on a regular basis.
100%. They've shown, in fact, before what happened during the COVID, when you isolate, you want to be exposed to your natural bugs. So your immune system knows that, right? And when you're not exposed, you're isolated. Now you go back out, you're not prepared. The immune system is like a muscle. It wants to be worked, but you want to give it the right substrates. So I can't remember the last time I actually got sick being high in vitamin D. So you want it to work, but you make sure you're ready. Like you're not going to go play an NFL game if you haven't worked out. You want to make sure you're that athlete. Let the immune system work out. That's the whole idea of it. And don't forget fever, cold. Those are things your body's doing to protect us. Fever's not bad. Cold's not bad. That's how your body gets rid of these toxins.
So to train for the winter season, go out and get a cold?
Yeah, well, give it the vitamin D and don't worry about it. Yeah.
Obviously, good diet, obviously exercise.
Yeah.
And I think, go to a movie with people, go to a concert.
No fear.
No
fear.
Yeah.
And
live your life.
And the thing about it also, Jim, is that one of the greatest things for overall health is sleep and fasting. When your body is fasted, it's actually the most preventive state of being sick. So that's important things. Because we overeat with sugar, it makes us weaker.
Right.
Back to our free radicals again.
Right.
But you talk about the different fluffiness of the cholesterol. These have to do with density, and the density has to do with sugar. The sugar is what manipulates the cholesterol.
And getting back to this protective for the flu season, obviously you talked a lot earlier about sleep. Any recommendations on how to prepare yourself for sleep?
There's a great book called Cardiac Cycle. But the bottom line is no TVs, no phones. You want to get rid of all the blue light. Blue light, it comes from the picture blue light. It's the first light in the morning when the dawn comes up. And the way the brain works, when the brain sees blue light, it turns off melatonin, which melatonin keeps us asleep. At nighttime, you want yellow light, which puts the melatonin on, makes you go to sleep. Again, Dr. Bennett's great on this stuff. I'm torn on melatonin. If you need aid, there's a thing called CBD Delta 8 and Delta 9. Delta 8 is more relaxing. Delta 9 seems to be working for sleep. You have L-theanine, you have magnesium, different types. 3 and 8 seems to be the one that goes to the blood-brain barrier best. But before all those kind of helping things, the key is to make sure you set yourself up for success. Turn the lights off. The TV. There's been studies that say, is it the TV, the blue light, or is it the stimulation? Maybe a combination of all those. But you want a dark room. You want to make sure that you could go to sleep. That's the biggest part of it.
Yeah, so you probably don't want to restore because you'll be so excited that you'll never be able to put it down.
Yeah, I hope that happened.
Back to cholesterol. Is flaxseed a good supplement to lower overall cholesterol if it's around 210?
Okay, that's my problem. I don't think being lower is beneficial at all. In fact, it shows if you're under 180, I know some doctors argue, I got that, but the data's out there, is actually you have more cancer, more overall deaths. That's why it's important. You have to do your research. I beg you. Do your research. It's out there. So when I was in school, 330 is considered high. Now it's 180. Which group lives longer? There's a phenomenal paper out of Japan in 2015 showing, I forget the actual number, but for every 23 points, you live like an extra 3 years higher. Okay, your immune system, the first line, you brought immunity up. The first line in our defense system, the first is cholesterol. It actually attacks and coats bacteria and bugs. So cholesterol. So now, according to flaxseed is an omega-6, omega-3. It appears the best omega-3s are animal source. So I'm more of a marine animal 3, but I think it's been shown to be superior than a plant.
Is the HDL to triglyceride ratio, is that, or is it might be reversed? Is that more of an important ratio than just the overall?
Yeah, well, triglyceride is purely sugar. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's why it's that. The HDL, here's what these numbers are. Liver makes LDL and sends it to the body. When the body uses it, it sends HDL back. There's no big difference. There's a thing called particle number. That's the culprit. And particle number is how many of those particles you have. That's like picture a Uber with passenger in it. The cholesterol is the passenger. The Uber is the problem. So the more Ubers you have on the road, more chance of of running to the wall, right? I have a terrible bad history. I have high particle number. But that's not the cholesterol. I just can't stress this data. But please look at Google. I know it's a standard. I know what they say. I got it. But I'm just reading myself what I would do. We get 1 to 4 days ain't worth the risk for me.
Okay. Back to some inflammation. Postmenopausal inflammation has been a real problem for me, mostly in my hips. I follow an anti-inflammation and gluten-free diet. Can hormone replacement therapy help with this?
100%. The reason why she has that in postmenopausal is because the 3 hormones that help in inflammation, order of importance, there's testosterone, estrogen, is gone. It's like telling me I'm a postmenopausal diabetic and I'm making no more insulin and my sugar's high. Well, you need sugar. Get rid of it. Take the insulin. Same thing. So the number one thing we have at Optimal Bios about after a couple weeks of being on testosterone for the first time, my joint pain is gone. That's like the number one, I say benefit I hear people tell me.
Advice for men transitioning from the shots, the creams, the orals to BHRT.
There's no transition per se because our algorithm takes that to account. Now, let's break this up. There are 4 classes of testosterone. There's bioidentical, your body makes, and that it can synthetically be made because it is man-made, but the structure is identical to our body. That's BHRT. Then you have 3 classes on the other side of the synthetic. You have what's called an ester, the most common, is bound testosterone bound to a molecule called cyprinate, ethylene, or propionate. That molecule allows it to sit in the muscle, so it's like a depot. It sits there. That peaks every 3.5 days, spikes and peaks. You have one called 19 or testosterone, which is testosterone modified, more potent. And you have one called 17 alkylation D-bol, which is the oral version. It's 1,000 times more potent, 1,000 times more on androgen aspect of it. All 3 of them work, but there are slight risk factors in them. The biggest one, the book out of Belgium called sex hormones and neurodegenerative diseases talks about they find that all three of that category increase a thing called neural apoptosis. It makes brain cells die off sooner. So studies show increased dementia and Alzheimer's on those synthetic arms. Small risk, but there's there. The bioidentical actually, we talked before, actually increases synapse, increases neuroplasticity. It actually strengthens the brain. So that to me is the biggest difference besides the up and down. Now that up and down cell may sound like nerdy. That doesn't matter. It does. Testosterone converts to estrogen. Estrogen leaves the body three ways. When testosterone is stable, that enzyme is stable, so the estrogen is stable. There's no roid rage. There's no gynecomastia. It's in women. There's no increased breast tenderness or moodiness. Men and moodiness is roid rage. When you have the up and down of the testosterone, that enzyme is never in sync with that. And that's where the side effects come from. And the pellet is a sustained release. There's a great paper. There's a way to judge patient happiness. It's called Zieg-Berlin test, Z-E-G Berlin test for women in menopause, how they benefit on hormones. And on pellets, they're virtually 100%, they feel great. The original study done on men was done on shots. Only 22% felt good on shots. On the pellet, 100%, because it's the sustained release.
Yeah, I'm amazed too that how many people that are on the shots don't know enough about the pellets. I think it's something that's unusual and foreign. I'm thinking to myself, just from a pure practical standpoint, I'd rather get placed once every 6 months than have to shoot myself every week, right?
The pellet was invented first, 1935. Testosterone was isolated first. Estrogen was second. Men were 1937, women 1935. The shot was in the late 30s, early 40s. It just has to do with half-life. There's a great book out of Germany called Testosterone. It's 800 pages on why testosterone is best. It's a great book. But they're pushing this one thing called testosterone ecodate, which is a long-acting shot. And now they're doing it orally. The half-life's 21 days. It's still, in the treatment section of the book, it says nothing better than pellets, but there's a 12.7% expulsion rate. Well, our rate's less than 1%. So by having less expulsion rate, even the book says the pellet's the best, but the problem is the expulsion. We don't have expulsion. Well, we do, but about 1%.
Right, right. Let's see, what else do we have here? Just general heart disease question. Why hasn't heart disease declined after the anti-smoking campaigns? Obviously, you talked a lot about sugar and diet. Are there anything else?
Since diabetes is so high, again, if you're diabetic and your testosterone is under 300, your death rate is 2.5 times higher. Now, this is important. Historically, in men, testosterone is considered low under 500. Now they're calling 264. Some universities say 170. A woman's equivalent of being severely low, 300 is severely low for a man. That's equivalent to 25. So these metabolic diseases, inflammation, being one cardiovascular disease, are enhanced. Now back to the diabetes. A man who's diabetic, we talked about, has an increased chance of vascular disease because of the inflammation.
It's an interesting question because Tucker Carlson's had a couple of health experts on.
Haley and Casey.
And he goes into a little bit of a history lesson and claims that the push to reduce smoking in this country had nothing to do with cardiovascular health. It had everything to do with testosterone, because they could lower the testosterone, then the citizenry, so to speak, would be.
Yeah, I know.
So the question is, does tobacco usage affect testosterone levels?
Yeah, nicotine may help it. That's what he's talking about. And the problem is it's the inhaling. There's so many more things to that, right? Now, there's a fantastic classical picture of a doctor, an OBGYN, selling Chesterfield cigarettes, the most recommended when you're pregnant, okay? And it's a great classic paper. And again, talk about that Tucker Carlson interview, the same companies that own tobacco own the highest food companies now, same marketing companies.
Right.
I just think we take everything with a grain of salt. And Tucker gets that path. And I do believe they want to have a society that is more bends their knee.
Right. Well, we don't need to go into that, but in terms of nicotine, there is
the problem is high nicotine's injected, it can kill you. It's it's a neurostimulant. So he loves his nicotine. I know that, but how you get to that is an issue.
Right.
But the actual molecule itself, we have nicotine receptors in our body.
So another question about OB. Obviously, we talked earlier about
OB, Optobio, or OB
off the
liver
vial.
babies.
No,
Okay.
off the vial. What labs are required, et cetera, et cetera. Once you're being treated, what are some of the things that a patient would need to continue to do to be treated?
Check lab-wise?
Anything. Like what's the process?
Well, the process is we get our labs, we do that, we find a dose for you, we place you, we check your labs again in 1 month. We follow up the next day how you're doing. But then we go through all the litany why you came. And then we try to correlate the symptoms, our new numbers to where you're at now. And that helps us guide, you may need less or more based upon these symptoms. Nothing's like simple like that. Our argument's pretty close, but that's it. And then we have a lot less labs to check in women and men based upon age and where they're at. So keep that going. We are very, very big on data, so that when we have our labs and we have our data, we can fine tune our numbers, because to get really nerdy, your receptors of antigen may be different than mine genetically. And that's why that's why I use the word range. These range we use are not limits. That's very important. So I find people with anxiety and depression do much better the higher it is. So I would hate to withhold them feeling great because you're over 916 today. What happens at 917? Oh my gosh, nothing.
Right.
In fact, we look at studies of men being 5 times a dose. Everything's just optimal as long as they get bioidentical structure. That's the most important part. These are human physiological levels, not super physiological. And if they say they're too high levels, then you ask the doctor, what was the level in 1945? If they don't know the answer, I would change, because the question any interesting doctor should ask, or anybody should ask, what was it before? Because just say, like, are we calling obesity normal now because a lot of everybody's having it? No, we should not. So I believe we have to make sure that all your questions are answered and you know what healthy feels like for you. And that's what's very, very important. But you're not a quintile. You're not a percentile. You're a human being. And that I pride ourselves on. We do an Optobio.
Well, on top of that too, you naturally may be at 1,000, right? And they're not going to tell you you're unhealthy at that point.
No, you can walk.
Right.
If you walked in at 1,300, what are you going to say? Lower? How do you lower, doc?
Right.
I don't know. yeah.
Right. Just wanted to softball for you, and we have a little bit more than 1 minute left. Haven't felt great, but my doctor said my labs are normal. Do you think BHRT might be an option?
Okay, which range, which labs? Again, back to a woman today. We'll see a woman. She's 3 to 41 is normal testosterone, and she's 4. You're normal. You feel like crap. What was the range when I was in school? 70 to 250. I wonder if you feel like crap at 200. That's the question. So it is trial and error. You got to try that out. But that's why you check. That's why we don't give everything one dose. We check the labs. But the answer is, what range, doctor? If they tell you, well, that's what everybody is, understand that range comes from checking 10,000 people. Here's my last example. If you look for an optimal blood sugar, say we find it's 85, it's under 85. That's our optimal blood sugar. But now you find that in a study, everybody in the blood sugar is 500. Oh, now the new level is 500. But the problem is they're all diabetic.
Right.
You would never use that data. We're all sick. That's the problem. So let's go back. I call it the pre-plastic era. Go back as far as we can and get that data, and then tell me how you feel.
As always, 60 minutes of chock full of information. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much.
And we look forward to doing this again. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.